And that's why the postseason aspect is so fun because of that.
Yes, sir. There she goes.
Hello and welcome to episode 232 of Section 138. I'm your host, Mark Colley, as always, joined by Bryson and Jacob. I chirped you guys for predicting 2-2 last time we spoke. I said it was boring, but you turned out to be right. The Blue Jays split a series at Tropicana Field with the Tampa Bay Rays. The bullpen is terrible the first couple of games. The offense doesn't show up. And then the two themes swap. The Blue Jays show up for games on Saturday and Sunday, and they revive what could have been a terrible series. Bryson, Jacob, how are you guys?
Definitely doing good. And it may have not have been the most famous pick or like the most, creative pick, Mark, like you were talking about, but in reality, it's all they needed to get out of there after a 4-game series at worst to come out with a split. We know about the playoff race. We know how now nothing has officially changed since the beginning of the weekend, of course, when it comes to the Jays and Rays. A completely different theme, like you said. Like there's the first 2 games, it wasn't looking good whatsoever. Quickly after game 2, I think my expectations kind of dropped to don't get swept. Like that's just the mood I was feeling. I was texting you guys yesterday, even about the Alek Manoah start on Saturday. I just didn't have a good feeling about where the offense stood until Whit Merrifield was our hero. And all of a sudden they come out with the split on the Sunday as well. You got to like how the series ended, and you got to like how it or how the team is rolling as they enter their final homestand of the regular season.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe one negative thing, we'll get that out of the way, I think, is Blue Jays do not win the season series against the Rays. So winning these last 2 games are of the utmost importance now, because if you're tied with the Orioles, not the Orioles, tied with the Rays at any point towards that end of the season, unfortunately, we're going back to the House of Horrors and probably the ugliest ballpark in Major League Baseball. So getting that 2-game lead, very, 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 very important. And it's not an easy rest of the season for either the Blue Jays or the Rays. A lot of division leaders, a lot of great teams, but you needed to win these 2 games. If you're going to not win the series, you have to split it, and they were able to do that for the last 2 games, and now it's up against the Yankees. That's going to be a great series. But yeah, no, basically they won. They had a moral victory, and I know we don't like to talk about that, but they're now leaving this field not hating themselves, realizing, oh, we're in a lot of deep trouble.
Those 2 words are the worst 2 words in sports. Moral victory. I hate it. I hate it. But I think this is more than a moral victory for the Blue Jays. And we talked about this last time we spoke, but taking a split at Tropicana Field against the Tampa Bay Rays, yes, you don't get the season series. And yes, this may come back to be a problem in a week or 2, but I think against a good team, against a team that's right there in the playoff race, to hold steady and to keep things at status quo, that's got to be a win in my books. And I think it is in all of our books. Like, it's an acceptable result. Of course, you hope that the Blue Jays do better, but the fact that you lose the 2 games, you have the resiliency and the strength to bounce back from that, not get down in the gutter, and be the better team for the final 2 games and build some momentum before you go home and face the Yankees. That's a big series, and I think we're all pretty happy with the result of it. Let's start with the first 2 games, because those games were abysmal, as we've been speaking about. And the bullpen holds a large part of the blame for those 2 games. Of course, there's other blame to go around, the starters not being their sharpest. And then, of course, the offense not totally showing up when it needed to. But you look at the bullpen, and for those first 2 games, there was real concern, at least I know for myself, I think for a lot of fans, that the bullpen was hitting a wall, that the Blue Jays were hitting a wall with the bullpen, because you look at the use that the bullpen has been thrown into over the last couple of weeks. They've been used a lot. They're exhausted. You have games that Mitch White is starting. You have games where Yusei Kikuchi is going 2-3 innings. You have games where Trevor Richards is starting, and you have games where José Berríos isn't getting out of the 3rd inning. So all these factors combine to put the Blue Jays bullpen in a less than ideal situation. And I think we kind of saw the results of that in the first 2 games of this series, where the bullpen hit a wall. And I think it's kind of an area of concern for me down the stretch, the fact that they can go from being good to totally collapsing, and someone like Jordan Romano can go from saving however many games in a row to blowing 2 straight saves. Like, that's an area of concern for me. I'm not saying, I don't want to rehash this conversation. I think Jordan Romano is a good pitcher. He's a phenomenal reliever. He's the best reliever the Blue Jays had, but it's just the fact that they can hit a wall so suddenly and just collapse for a couple of games, it is an area of concern for me, especially as we head into the playoffs where you are going to be relying a lot on the bullpen and a lot on some of those, 4 or 5 same guys, Yimi Garcia, Adam Simber, Anthony Bass, Jordan Romano, Tim Meza. I'd say those are the 5 guys that you're going to be throwing out there, if not every night, 2 out of every 3 nights. That's just the way the postseason works. And if they hit a wall after overuse a little bit, I'm a little bit worried about what might happen if you're using them every day in the playoffs. So not a huge concern in the grand scheme of things, just something that I think we learned from this series.
Well, I have 2 things that go on to this, and I think are a little bit of a something that'll give people a little bit of a breather here. Number 1, starting rotation is not going to be this bad all the time. Like José Berríos, he's had a better second half of the season, but that 2 innings, a lot of earned runs charged to him, that can't happen, especially against teams that you need to win against. And when you get into the playoffs, you can't give up a game, because especially that wild card series, it's 3 games, 2 games if you lose the first one, and then who knows what happens. Like, that is not what you can see, what you can have happen. And the second thing is, the playoffs are a little different in the sense that if it's a 3-game series, a 5-game series, or a 7-game series, realistically, you need 4 starters. I think, yeah, you can have that 5th starter, but if you're in the wildcard series, to make things simple, the first series that they'll play in, assuming they get in, I know we discussed who we think is going to pitch, but realistically, it's going to no, just listen. It's most likely going to be Manoah, Gosman, and Stripling in whatever order. So, in the worst case, say Berríos has a abysmal finish to his season, it's not like he'd be a factor in that wildcard series anyways, unless it was, I don't know, somebody gets rocked and they just need somebody to throw innings before the bullpen gets into it, something like that. But those are the 2 things I think that definitely make it a little bit better, because you're not going to be relying on, just the first 2 games. The Blue Jays allowed 10 runs in the first, or both of the first 2 games. Berríos only the 2 innings. Richards had to throw an inning and a third. Zach Pop had to throw almost 2 innings, 1 and 2/3, an inning to David Phelps, 2 innings out of Foster Griffin. You're not ideally going to see that. And even with Mitch White in that second game going 4 innings, you then see Meza with a third of an inning, Bass with 2/3, Simber with 2 innings. So yeah, maybe not ideal for him, but then Garcia with an inning. Ideally, you're not going to see that. What you are going to see if you are in a playoff series, you're most likely going to see something like Alek Manoah, 6-7 innings, which he did in that second game. Then all you need to use are guys like Meza and Romano, who, okay, yeah, maybe they're going to be used a lot more when every single day is a game that you absolutely need to win. But I think the bullpen works best when the starting rotation is not doing the complete opposite of what you expect it to do. Because that's the big thing to remember here, is you can expect Gosman, Berríos, well, maybe Berríos, but Gosman, Manoah, Stripling, these are guys that you can expect to go at least 5, 6, if not 7 innings. And then you're not necessarily just stuck with your backs up against the wall trying to figure out who's going to cover innings. The only, I guess, issue with this is, except for travel days, you are playing every single day in the playoffs. And that is, kind of why you really, really need to plan these things out carefully. But I'm not necessarily as concerned, because even if you use 3 or 4 starters in your division series, or 3 starters in your wild card series, you still have that room. You're going to keep Kikuchi in the bullpen, maybe Mitch White, one of those 2 in the bullpen, Berríos most likely in the bullpen. So you can rearrange it as much as you need. And knowing that you're only going to play a couple of games within like the span of a week, you have, I think, the flexibility that you need to be able to maneuver these guys. But it's not one that I'm necessarily worried about. Now, if they collapse, if we're seeing Romano blow saves again, not necessarily do what he'd been doing for most of the season, which I don't think is going to happen, but say that happens, then we're a little bit nervous. But knowing that every single game is of the utmost importance, and because of the less amount of games that you're playing within the time span, you have the ability to say, okay, Simber, you're going to pitch today because Romano's not pitching well, or whatever like that. You can do that. That's why I think down the stretch, absolutely, it's important. But I think for the Blue Jays' sake, they have the pieces that if they needed to move things around on the fly, I think they can do it. And I think, honestly, it starts with that starting rotation. And so that's why if you're Berríos, you need to bounce back. If you're Kevin Gosman, you need to have solid innings, solid outings. And that's all things that I think will happen. But going into these last couple series of the season, the last homestand of the season begins tomorrow, you are kind of in crunch time. And even if you've been on the team all season long, you are kind of auditioning for your playoff role And we'll have to see how that goes. I do think the team will perform well. I mean, magic number it's winding down, so eventually they're going to get to that point where they make it. But it's one where I think it will solve itself, this whole bullpen situation, but it needs to start with that rotation being a lot better. And we saw it in the second half of this last series.
Yeah, that second half of the last series is kind of why I'm not really concerned or not concerned whatsoever. I don't think so, other than obviously being overworked is something that has been a topic of conversation all year. And that's exactly what's been happening throughout moments of the season. We've talked about it where even just, I guess, before the trade deadline, this was a weakness of the team. And it has just been something where they needed to go out externally and get a couple guys in. They did that. And I think it's just the fact of how this series started to how it ended, it really does give you a good perspective on, I guess, just the bullpen situation in general. I mean, you look at the first two games where I'm pretty sure the Rays scored 10 runs in both the first game. The first game they scored 10 runs, and that was when it was 10-6. So that was game two with Mitch White pitching. So that was obviously not a good one. And of course, you look at game one as well, where they struggled when they lost 10-5. So I was right. They scored 10 runs in the first two games. And you had Mitch White starting, you had José Berríos starting, and I understand to the point that you need José Berríos to like bounce back, and you got to hope he bounces back and all that. But I mean, pretty much what you said, Jacob, or part of what you said about it being crunch time, like you can't really afford to do this every single time. And it was one of those starts where it looked like the José Berríos from the first half of the season where his stuff was just off and everything he threw basically got turned into batting practice. And that's exactly what happened when he lasted 2 innings. And of course, we know the amount of, I guess, usage that the bullpen had after that. And of course, in game two with Mitch White only going 4 innings. And of course, that didn't go smoothly as well either. But then, the Jays gave up 3 or 10 runs in the first 2 games. Well, they pretty much responded to that by allowing 1 run in the last 2 games. And that's exactly what happened in game 3. You had Alek Manoah go out, 7 strong innings. We expect all this from Alek Manoah, and he just seems more dominant each time. It feels like that extra day off definitely helped him in terms of his velocity, because their past couple starts in the second half of the season, usually when his start has begun early on into the outing, the velocity is down, and then it takes him maybe, I don't know, about half a start to get his velocity back. And that's what you've seen. And you kind of, wonder the fatigue factor on that. So the extra day off has definitely helped him on that. And then you hand it off to Mesa Romano, like you guys were talking about. Pretty simple on that part. And then you look at today in game 4 with Ross Stripling going 5 good innings. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people I thought or saw online questioning the fact that Stripling only went 5 innings, and maybe they thought he could have won one more inning, which is fair. But anyways, he goes 5 good innings, and he hands things off to what you guys said after with Pop, Simber, Richards, and Kikuchi, because by the end of the game, it was a blowout, and luckily he didn't need to use guys like Jordan Romano. So that's good. And of course, that's a lot better than game 1 and 2. I think the big factor of this bullpen, which becomes fairly obvious, is going to be the performance of the starting rotation. You see game 3 and game 4, how it how it compares to game 1 and 2. And this goes on guys like José Berríos. You need him to pitch well like he has in the second half of the season. And the fact that he's giving up a stinker now this late in the season doesn't exactly have me very confident in him. But that's just been a story pretty much for him all season in terms of that. And that's why when we've had conversations about who's starting this wildcard series coming up, a lot of us don't really have José Berríos starting that in terms of a plan A, in terms of what you're throwing out game 1, game 2, game 3. And that's pretty much been the talk with everybody. And unfortunately, that's just been the case with him this year. And we know that Mitch White was just recalled to pretty much fill in as a 5th starter for the last homestand of the series. And then, of course, that last series in Baltimore. And you won't have to really revert to him too much, not many more times. And hopefully his next start, the Jays already have clinched a playoff spot. The idea, or now the notion that's been put in place with, how you start Alek Manoah to clinch home field, but then if you do that, he's not exactly available for game 1 of the wild card round. I know that's just another whole can of worms, but I thought that was an interesting thing. And I saw it a few times on the weekend, and I saw it a lot today. So I was wondering what you thought about that one.
I know it's a can of worms. I think the Blue Jays, I don't know, to be honest. It's a really tough question to answer because there's so many different sides to it. And the fact that, yes, Alek Manoah is your best starter. I guess what you're asking is wasting Alek, I shouldn't say wasting, is using Alek Manoah in game 162 to win home field advantage worth the cost of potentially losing a game because you have a bad start from Jose Berríos, because he's the guy who is the next man up. Or you have Alec Manoah go on short rest, 1 day short rest, because that's also a possibility. I don't know if Alec Manoah has ever done that in his career. I don't think he has. So I don't know if you want to be experimenting with that in the middle of the playoffs. But then again, if any pitcher can go on short rest, I think it would be Alec Manoah, because he's a guy who doesn't seem very married to his routine or routine oriented, because he's, the most relaxed guy in the clubhouse and in the dugout on start days. So I don't know. I think, okay, talking through it, I think I'm leaning towards start him game 162 if it's a tiebreaker and you need to win that game, and then have him go on short rest if the series goes 3 games. Because I think Alec Manoah on short rest, only going, who knows, 4 innings, is going to be better than Jose Berríos on however much rest he's on at that point, 6, 7, 8 days of rest. Because Alec Manoah, I mean, it speaks for itself. We saw what he did: 7 solid innings, reached a career high in pitches this past series. He has reached 300 strikeouts, the fastest guy in Blue Jay history to do that. You look at his road ERA, some of the best in the majors. You look at his ERA overall, one of the best in the majors. I think it's third in the American League, behind, I think, Shane McClanahan and Justin Verlander. I think the two ahead of him. Dylan Cease might be up there. I don't know. But he has one of the best ERAs in the American League. Like, he is the ace of this rotation. So it's just trying to manage your resources. And I think that would be my preferred scenario. Have him go game 162 if you need him, and then use him on short rest in game 3 of the wild card series. Another interesting facet of all of this that I think is really, really intriguing is the fact that you may need to use a 5th starter at some point in this postseason. Just looking at the schedule, if the ALCS goes to game 7, game 3 through game 7, there's no off days. It's October 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th. That's 5 games back to back to back. You would need a 5th starter for game 7 of the ALCS. And I think that would put a lot of teams in a terrible situation. Of course, it would put the Blue Jays in a terrible situation because they don't have a 5th starter. So you're talking about the possibility of either having whoever started game 3, I guess, go on short rest, or you're talking about having a bullpen day with Trevor Richards and Yusei Kikuchi and Mitch White in game 7 of the ALCS, the 9 innings that decides
don't
who
even
goes to
suggest
the
that.
World Series. It's a bonkers idea, but like, any team that gets to game 7 of the ALCS is going to have to face this conundrum, because I mean, I think for every team, the 5th starter is either A, non-existent, or B, pretty bad. So it's going to be a conundrum for whatever team gets into that situation. I just think it's really interesting for the Blue Jays. But again, I think it goes back to conversation about who can go on short rest. If it lines up that Alec Manoah is going game 3 of the ALCS, he's going game 7 on short rest in my mind. So interesting conversation. Fun to be talking about these things and not having to worry about whether the Blue Jays are making the postseason or not.
Well, see, it's not like this hasn't been done before. You remember game 2 and 5 of the 2015 division series, Marcus Strowman started both of those. And I believe Marco Estrada, there was a couple of games. I think he pitched game 1 and game 5, maybe, of the Royals series that same
And
year.
I want to say Madison Bumgarner. I mean, everyone knows how insane he was,
Mhm.
but I think in the World Series, he went game 1, game 4, and then
He was
came
short
out and
rest every
relieved and
start.
pitched
Yeah.
like 4 innings in game 7. Like, it's been done, but then again, Madison, like, you weigh the damage on an arm potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, true. It's not ideal to potentially have somebody go on 3 or 4 days rest, but I think if it happens, if it needs to happen, the players would be more than willing to do it. Now, obviously, if they're not feeling well, or if they can only go a few innings, then that's a different story. But it's, yeah, actually, it's good that you bring this up, because it is something that we do need to consider. You're not going to get Alec Manoah, Kevin Gausman, and Ross Stripling every game. So part of me really hopes Jose Berríos bounces back, and he has been good this second half of the season, a lot better. But it's one where
Okay, but even if he has what, 2 starts left, even if
something like
he
that.
is like pitches, let's say 8 scoreless innings in each start, do you still trust him in the postseason because he's been so spotty?
Nope.
If that's how he ends his season or something similar, like if he's good, if he's not anything close to what he was against the Rays, I still think you give him a start. No, it depends on the scenario. If you were on the brink of elimination, I don't think so. If See, that's tough because the championship series and the World Series are the only ones where it's not a three games that you need to win or lose. That's
Well,
one.
you may need him in the division series as
That's
well
that's what I'm
because just
saying.
the
It's
way
tough
that the
there.
rest lines up. So
Mhm.
like you may the Blue Jays don't really have a choice if they get past the wild card series. They have to use Jose Berríos. You just pray that it's not in important games.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So with the division series is I think if you're up 2-1 or 2-0, you can put him out there. But if it's basically if it's something else like that, if you're facing elimination or down in the series, unfortunately you cannot trust him because say you're facing elimination and he just is not the Barrios that you need him to be. Well, then you're packing your bags early. That's the tough part about it. So it's a tough thing to discuss. Nobody wants to talk like this, and nobody wants to say, "Hey, the guy that the Blue Jays traded top prospects for and invested like 200 million or 140 million, whatever the exact numbers were, we don't even want him in the playoffs." But it's unfortunately one you have to have. But I guess going back to what I said earlier, if you're in the scenario, say the division series, if Barrios does not perform well, you can throw Mitch White out or you could throw somebody else in. Like, okay, I know Bryson obviously doesn't like that. No, but what I'm saying is that they have guys that can take the innings, knowing that each game is the importance is magnified, and maybe Mitch White in a playoff series is not the best option. But basically, what I'm saying is that they can reconfigure their roster if they need to. But yeah, no, I think it's one where you, other than just begging Barrios to be better, I don't know what else you can do because he's just been very inconsistent, and you do not have that flexibility for inconsistency in the playoffs. So I think also it's one where run support is going to be key for him, or key for any of the starters. But if you're Alec Manoah or Ross Stripling, Kevin Gosman, you kind of have to win your games or be part of the reason why the team wins the game. Because if you lose and you're relying on Barrios and then I don't even want to name other names for multiple elimination games, you're in some deep trouble. But I don't know. Part of me, and this is just wishful thinking, but I think he'll be better in the playoffs. Look at Marcus Stroman. This is a very different scenario, but he had a terrible 2016 season, very up and down, but then he was a lot better in the playoffs. Something like that could happen. I know the Twins, if I remember correctly, started him in the wild card game a couple seasons ago. Something like that. I feel like it was him, or I don't know. But he was the Twins ace for a
Wait,
while.
who were we talking about again?
Barrios. Yeah, Barrios.
Okay. You were
thought
just
he was
talking
talking
about
about
Strowman.
Strowman.
No, I
Confused,
was
yeah.
talking about Strowman. Then I'm saying
Okay.
Barrios kind of gives me those same vibes where he could turn things around in the playoffs. But let's just make it there. Then we'll have the headaches and head scratching conversations about that because I'd rather have that conversation than how do they make the playoffs next season.
Yeah, Mark. I was confused, just like you were there, but no,
Yeah, sorry, I meant
understand
to
what
say
you're saying, though,
Strowman
Jacob. Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
Barrios. Yeah,
Yeah,
like two separate
well,
trains of thought.
there's a lot to unpack from this conversation. So, I mean, if you first want to talk about the 5 starter thing or whatever it is, I think you were talking about in the ALCS if that ever happened. Like, I just feel like since it's something that we very rarely even see. Like, I'm willing to guarantee that there's no chance there's going to be a 5th starter. And really, the only other solution, from what you guys were saying on the other hand of that, is that yeah, it's going to be full of people on short rest. The only good thing about that is that every single team is going to have the exact same issue. So it's not like you're at some sort of competitive disadvantage to a different team. It's everyone's going to be on short rest. And that's the way the playoffs work. You guys were talking about tons of scenarios. When you think about it, Prime Madison Bumgarner back in those eras where the Giants would win every other year, he was the guy that was pitching out of the bullpen. He was pitching every like 2 or 3 days. If you want to even look at a most recent example, it was from last year when Max Scherzer came out of the bullpen in a do or die game. I think it was against the Giants. I think it might have been even later on in the postseason, but he came out of the bullpen either way, and he was traded at the deadline to beat their ace. You want to think about a Blue Jays situation, you have even David Price coming out in game 6 of the ALCS, even though the Jays lost that game. He came out of the bullpen that day on short rest. So this is all something that I'm sure they're planned for. This is something as well where you have multiple plans at a time. And what I mean by that is if Jose Barrios is pitching in a DS game, because of course, like you guys said, if you move past the wild card round, then you're likely going to have to revert to 4 pitchers like it usually is. Guess what happens if he has one bad or I would say maybe 2 or 3 bad hitters, 1 bad inning? He's done. There's no give him 4 innings. hopefully you get enough innings so you can hand it off to the bullpen. In a postseason game, that's not the way it works in the postseason. And that's why I always find it interesting and exciting because of that, especially in the wild card series or even when the wild card game was a thing. The short leash on these pitchers, if they don't feel it, they're done. And we've seen that before. And that's exactly why these aces come out of the bullpen here and there. That's why they pitch on short rest. And even if you have, a Berríos penciled in for game 4, is it really set in stone that the Jays don't revert to, hey, Alek Manoah's on short rest after pitching game 1. The Jays need a win to stay alive. He's pitching. There's so many different scenarios that they go over. Nothing set in stone in the postseason ahead of time, unfortunately. Unless you're Alek Manoah or Kevin Gausman in this rotation, nothing will be set in stone past them. And I can fully believe that. And of course, I'm talking about if they get by that wild card round, because things open up in the ALDS. It's a best of 5 game series, right? We're talking about that. And of course, the CS and the possible World Series, or even possible CS, I should say, that's 7 game series. So you have so many more options once you get past that wild card round. But even when you want to look at the wild card round, the same thing applies in a way that even though you have 3 starters penciled in, you still have different you have different plans. You're going to have guys on short rest. They might be coming out of the bullpen. And that's something that you're going to have to be prepared for. And I'm sure they've already began conversations about that. And again, that's why postseason baseball is the best for that, because of how quickly people make decisions and all of that. I mean, if you're in a do or die game 3 and you need, let's just say Alek Manoah, hypothetical, he pitches game 1, he does amazing. The Jays are in a do or die game in game 3. Are you really handing the ball off to Mitch White for, an inning or 2? Or are you going to go to Alek Manoah on short rest in order to keep your season alive? I think we know the answer to that. And I think those are just, that's an example out of tons that you're going to see, not just with the Jays, obviously, but pretty much through everybody throughout the rest of the postseason. So hopefully the 5th starter conversation, and hopefully the Jays get to that point, number 1. Hopefully that's something that, for heaven's sake, does not happen, because I don't think I'd be able to handle watching Mitch White, with all due respect, in a playoff game. Jose Berríos in a playoff game seems even risky enough, and you might have to do that at some point, like we were talking about, if you get by the wild card round. But I don't want that idea planted in my head. I would rather short rest from guys if they're giving 2, 3, 4 innings, like you said, Mark. And that's why the postseason aspect is so fun, because of that. But once they actually clinch, when we get to that day, hopefully could be this week, it's going to be interesting, although it won't be, I guess, thoroughly announced until after probably that Baltimore series. We're going to have, once that Baltimore series kicks in next week for the final series of the year, that's when you're going to have an idea of what things are going to look like, because then you likely start to set up your rotation. Then it's going to be interesting when we eventually find out what they're going to be going with, or at least what the rough plan is for game 1, game 2, and game 3.
The one thing I'm learning from this conversation is that the Blue Jays have no choice but to carry Mitch White and Yusei Kikuchi on their postseason roster. And we've been criticizing Yusei Kikuchi for months and saying we don't want him anywhere near the postseason roster. But when you look at it the way that we just looked at it, how much these games are compacted because of the lockout, shifting the season by a week, et cetera, and the addition of a 3-game series at the start of the postseason, you kind of need those guys on your roster, which sucks. It sucks, but it's just the way that life is right now. So, Bryson, you mentioned clinching. We should mention the Blue Jays magic number is at 4, which is awesome. The Blue Jays have the potential to clinch on Tuesday against the New York Yankees at home. If they win the next 2 games and the Orioles lose the next 2 games, we know the Orioles lost tonight in extras to the Houston Astros. And so the Blue Jays magic number goes down from 6 to 4 today. Very exciting. It's probably going to happen at least by the end of this week. And that's a lot of fun. Let's talk. We've talked Manoah. We've talked about how phenomenal his start is. I want to talk about another standout from this series, and that's Whit Merrifield, because for all intents and purposes, before the past 4 days, Whit Merrifield was seen as a trade deadline dud. He was seen as a useless trade. He did not do anything for this team. And he goes down to Tropicana Field and he lights himself on fire. He is now an influential part of this team. He has a couple phenomenal games. He raises his batting average with the Blue Jays from below 200 to, last time I checked, it was about 230. I imagine it's changed after today's game. He just turned his time with the Blue Jays around. Hopefully it continues. Hopefully it's not just a flash in the pan, but the potential impact of him, especially as a second baseman, with Santiago Espinal still on the 10-day IL, it's a big potential impact, and it could be a big factor in the Blue Jays. I don't want to say playoff run because we know they're making the playoffs, but certainly where they end up, whether they're hosting, we know how tight it is right now. All the teams within basically 2.5 games of each other in the standings. He's going to be a big part of that if he can stay hot, and I think that's the key part because it could just be a couple good games and it could fizzle out.
Well, I mean, right now you got to ride the hot hand, and with Gurriel on the IL as well, him and Espinal, he can play both infield and outfield. And I know Gurriel is expected to come back soon, but right now, Whit Merrifield is somebody that you have to roll with, and he's obviously the 2 home runs in one of those games. He's actually you mentioned his average up to, it's looking like 236 now with the Blue Jays. So it's or a season total as well, but with the Blue Jays, it's definitely, he's ideally not the best numbers, but when you consider that it's gone from under 200 to almost mid 200s, that is quite good. And even here, like he's going and he's having competitive at bats. And in that second or in the third game of the series, that was all the runs that the Blue Jays had. They would have easily lost the game 1-0 if he didn't hit that home run. What did they do? They won 3-1. Now, obviously, different things could have factored in, even if it was, but whatever. Anyways, he provided the offense, and the team, he's part of that group, and he unfortunately hasn't been an everyday player this season, at least with the Blue Jays, but he right now is, I think, somebody that you absolutely need to roll with. And you can put Biggio at first, although I prefer Guerrero there. Maybe have somebody else DH, have Whit Merrifield in the infield or outfield if you need him. But it's one where, yeah, the trade is not the best in terms of guys that you can acquire. But right now, when you have two of your regulars, or a regular and a semi-regular, out of your lineup, you're now relying on guys like Tapia, who for some weird reason just always seems to hit triples whenever I'm just watching the game, whatever. But you're rolling with him, who's having himself a great last couple of weeks of the season. Whit Merrifield's now having a great series. You look at guys like Bichette, who's getting hot. Hernandez hitting a couple home runs in the series. Like the team, even with the catchers, I forgot to mention them. Kirk with the home run, Jansen's still playing well. The whole offense seems to be clicking right now, and it's ones where, yeah, obviously Whit Merrifield not hitting a home run, they probably still win or go on to win or make the playoffs and whatever. But this is somebody that if you're in the playoffs, he is not just come in and play defense for 2 innings or run for one guy. Like, he is now somebody that you legitimately can trust, and hopefully it stays. I mean, it could just be riding the hot hand right now, but as of right now, I think you give him the playing time. You let him, he's earned it. You let him go out there, you play. If he's one of those key reasons why the Blue Jays end up winning most of the rest of their games, hopefully win the wild card series, it's easily, it'll easily be looking back as well. This trade wasn't crazy at the time, but you look at it and he's a guy that just did a lot of good things for them.
Sorry, Jacob, just wanted to correct you. Whit Merrifield's stats with the Jays, his average is actually with the Blue Jays through 35 games, which is updated today on different sites, is actually 220. Just wanted to correct you on that one. But either way, you guys get the idea. Oh,
I will say, before today, I think it was like 225 or 220.
Yeah, I was just joking. But yeah, anyways, yeah. We understand what everyone's saying. And, I mean, it's something that, as much as Whit Merrifield was brought over here, we understood why the trade was made to begin with, despite that whole vaccination nonsense. We knew that this year in particular for his career, it was a down year, even before the trade happened. It's just something that, he wasn't really used to in terms of struggling as much as he did. He comes over here, he turns into kind of a bench player because of the struggles continue as he became a Blue Jay. And he had to adapt to a new role with the team. And it was mentioned so many times on the broadcast about how, Whit Merrifield's anxious to get in there. He's anxious to show his teammates what he can do, how it's different from him that he's not playing every day. He used to be the Iron Whit Merrifield, who pretty much turned the series around after that home run in Game 3. Definitely the least I would have expected out of that. But even before the series, he started playing a little bit better, as much as the numbers truly not showing it, and that it really did show throughout the weekend that he, first of all, loves Tropicana Field. And now the question is going to be if he can kind of keep this outside of Tropicana Field. And I know he talked about it even on his post-game interview, saying A lot of people don't understand that I could hit. It's just that I was playing at Kauffman Stadium my entire career. If Whit Merrifield continues to play well, it just, entering kind of the end of the season where Santiago Espinal may come back off the IL. We think he will be. It's just the playing time is going to go to Merrifield. You're starting to see that now. The Jays are finally giving him that opportunity. Of course, he finally took advantage of it, but now he's starting to play consistently. And I truly am curious to see how much it's going to continue. I know he's not just solely a Tropicana field hitter, but you can't ignore the splits. He loves it there. Now, the question for him and the big test for him will be taking that with them back up to Rogers Center, back up to Baltimore next week. And if things go well for him, there's a very good chance that he's starting a couple games in the playoffs. And that's why it's going to be interesting to see that. And of course, hopefully a guy like Lourdes Gurriel Jr. does come back as well, as they definitely are missing him. And you just hope that, as we've talked about throughout the entire season with this team, is that hopefully everyone continues to catch fire, which is why the way the series ended makes me feel very confident heading into this upcoming homestand.
All right, we got 3 games at home against the New York Yankees. The potential for the Blue Jays to clinch for the first real time. I'm not considering 2020, the first time since 2016. Before we get to series predictions, I do want to mention Aaron Judge is sitting at 60 home runs, and he has the potential. I would say it's very likely that he hits the record tying home run. And yes, the record is 61, not Barry Bonds. I think it's very likely that he ties 61 Roger Maris in this series. I think there's a good potential he goes ahead and sets the all-time home run record in Toronto. So that should be really fun to look for. And even though it is Aaron Judge, even though it's against the Blue Jays, I cheer for him regardless. It's an incredible accomplishment and something. I mean, you look at it, there's like 6 or 7 seasons that have been above 61 home runs in baseball history, and they are all Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, and Mark McGwire. I think that speaks for itself. Okay. That being said, 2 questions for you. Standard series prediction, and will the Blue Jays clinch by the next time we talk?
Well, first off, they're going to have clinched by the next time we talk. I'd hope, but I think that they will, honestly. If you take 2 of 3 realistically is likely here. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I think honestly, by the next time we talk, okay, by the end of the week.
It requires the Blue Jays taking 2 of 3, then the Orioles losing 2 of 3. I don't know who the Orioles are playing this week.
I think it's I'm not even sure. I think the Orioles.
Give me 2 seconds.
They're against the Red Sox. Yeah, so by the end of the week for sure. By the end of the series, I'm not sure. But as for Aaron Judge, you guys are not going to like what I have to say about this. But Gausman in game 1, Berríos game 2, and then I don't think they have a starter as of looking at Sportsnet. I don't think they have somebody listed for game 3 of the series.
I don't think anything's confirmed yet.
I'm just looking. Okay, so yeah, but as of Sportsnet, I see Gausman, Berríos, and then an unnamed starter. But if it's that, and then who knows what they do in the final game, he could be sitting at 63, potentially 62, 63, because we've seen what Gausman's not that bad. His just numbers aren't great at home, but Berríos has just been a train wreck kind of the last little while. I think so as of the Aaron Judge conversation, I think he ties, if not breaks the record. As for the Blue Jays clinching, I think they can take 2 of 3, at least 1 of 3, but it's tough when you also consider the Red Sox and the Orioles. So I'd say by the end of the week, but maybe not by the end of the time we talk, or by the next time we talk.
Yeah, I think there's projected stars series by series, which is interesting. So I think, Mark, you said the earliest is Tuesday that they can clinch. I don't think they clinch by Tuesday. I'll say by next weekend they clinch. Of course, we'd love to be talking at the end of the series with them clinching, but a lot's obviously got to happen. Of course, the Jays definitely have had their luck though over the past couple of days with the Mariners kind of sliding a bit, and even the Orioles losing a couple games to the Houston Astros. So magic numbers at 4. We know that every time the Jays win and the Orioles lose, it pretty much goes down by 2. So that's exactly what happened this weekend. Pretty much the magic number going from 6 to 4 that quickly in a span of 24 hours. It's going to be interesting. But for series predictions, even though we don't have any confirmed starters and I'm going in blind, like we all are kind of with this, I will say I'll say they take 2 out of 3 from the Yankees. I'm not worried about the 2 out of 3. I'm worried about if the Red Sox can take 2 out of 3 from the Orioles. I think that'll be the deciding factor if they can clinch by Tuesday night.
All right. I think, yes, Aaron Judge hits home run 62. And I think that the Blue Jays take 1 of 3.
I completely forgot about that with Judge. I'm sorry. I think he does as well. Yeah.
Okay. I just think, like, if Judge is hitting well, as he is prone to do, evidenced by one of the best offensive seasons in baseball history, the Blue Jays are probably going to lose 2 games. I hope they don't. And we don't know the starters again. But Manoah's not going in this series, so maybe that messes things up a bit. I don't know. I go 1 of 3. Hate to be pessimistic, but the Yankees are playing well right now. Okay, that's the episode for today. Thank you, as always, for joining and listening to us talk about the Jays. As always, you can support us by giving us a rating and review wherever you find your podcast. You can go subscribe to our YouTube. You can go check out our Patreon at patreon.com/section138pod. And you can also check us out on social media. That's at section138pod and Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. This series, regardless of what happens, will be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun in front of packed Toronto crowds. We will catch you when the Blue Jays may have clinched a playoff spot at the end of this series.